Okay, so great. Hey, it's not on me. Do I have to go back up here or? Okay. Hey, there I am. You can all see me. I guess that's right. Anyway, um, wow, it's great to be here. And I just want to make sure we've got the presentation up so that I know that we're on the same page, and then we'll get Cody. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so it's a pleasure to be here, and I'd like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to come and tell a little bit of a story and to do it in a hybrid way. I'm here live. Cody, my business partner, is just outside of Kingston. He'll be participating in part of this session as well. So the focus of the presentation is slightly different. I made some adjustments. I guess they call that being agile, and I've tried to sort of adjust some of the ideas and thoughts to reflect some of the amazing ideas we've seen presented over the last couple of days. So you may see some echoes or hear some echoes of a couple of the other presentations, but I thought it was great. I mean, the diversity of the material presented here was just amazing and really interesting for me, because in a previous life, way back when, 5, 6, 7 years ago, when I was with the province of Manitoba, I would go to the sessions and you could see that there was this emergence of open data practices occurring there. And it's so great to see the advance of the community and the advance of the practice, even though it is challenging as hell, but it's still really worthwhile. I'm going to make an argument and try and do a few things today in the 30 minutes. I want to touch on the notion of economic innovation. And it's interesting because I met some really cool people here, people who are not only practitioners or academics, some are even budding entrepreneurs. And the fact that I just stumbled into a session on VC financing next door, it was awesome. Like that was very cool. So that lots of dimensions have been covered here. So I want to talk to you about that, because a little bit of what you're going to hear is the story of myself as a former public servant with a little bit of an entrepreneurial spirit, saying, "Hey, I wonder if I could start a company." And then I worked with Cody, who is the real brains and the PhD behind all of the math and the statistics. But he's also the guy who writes about and thinks about ethics and explainability and bias, and very value driven. And you'll hear a bit more of that later. Number two is I want to encourage you to think about one of the nice themes about this, which is practicality. So the CCAN presentations, hey, you got a data set, here's the tool, here's how to use the tool, here's how to upload the tool, right? So there's been a lot of focus on actual practical things you can do. That's part of what we're going to pitch here today. Is there's a free application here that you can go and use and try out and say, hey, that was cool. And the premise of this is around democratization. So you'll see that the business concept here is, could we tackle an issue that's a problem for analysts, particularly in the public sector, particularly related to text analytics? So this is text. This isn't quant. This is the text side, which is fascinating, because when you go into open data, there's not much of it, right? And we've heard reasons why, and we'll go into more of those. But the interesting thing, and you heard Jamie's presentation, you heard the phenomenal presentation from earlier today. I'm trying to remember her name, but she's now consulting with the City of Ottawa. She's in that social enterprise, which is another theme today. There's not only an economic innovation in terms of for-profit companies, but there's been at least 3 references to people who are running social enterprises in this space, which is interesting, because part of the debate we're having in our little company here is, should we be a social enterprise or should we be a for-profit? Well, as a shareholder, I don't know, we're gonna have that debate offline, but you get the idea. But it's an interesting option, because part of what we're thinking of is maybe we could actually add more value as a salaried member of a social enterprise. Anyway, let's get started. I want to just highlight the fact that, Gartner and, AI is everywhere, and it's a big, huge, emerging issue that people are wrestling with. And Gartner recently came out with his top 10 technology trends, and 3 of them involved AI. One was applied observability, which I'll get into in a second, because that's exactly where we are working with various governments across the country, is how do you, particularly in the space of the service delivery space, and what can we do about observing the way in which citizens, customers, clients talk about their service experience, and what can we infer from that? And we'll give you a case study from the region of Peel, who's taking all the data from their contact centers and trying to figure out what they mean about Service BC, 3.4 million phone calls a year. How can they inform their service delivery experience? We've heard a lot about AI trust, right? So if we're going to use AI, and I remember, in one federal department, there are over 300 AI projects, but they're all having to go through the various frameworks to make sure that they are going to sustain the trust of the public. Huge issue. And then this notion of adaptive AI, which we'll get into in a sec, which is the capabilities and powers of AI are starting to become increasingly sophisticated, and they just illustrate or point to further applications. And you've heard a lot of those being discussed at the conference. So probably just spend a couple of minutes on observability. But when you think about what we do here, we are trying to move from having insights on raw data, whether that be emails, events, images, conversations, text conversations, social media conversations. Can we put that in the context of the client journey? Can we then get some insight as to what's going on? And could that even be so advanced as to be proactive? Can we infer from a conversation the emotional sentiment and the emotional engagement of somebody on the phone, such that you can proactively prompt a customer service agent to adjust in real time their interactivity? For those of you from the federal government, one of the most interesting organizations I've seen way out there on the limb years ago, Federal Credit Corporation. They're essentially a bank. They essentially work with one of the most sophisticated client bases in Canada. We're talking about essentially their clients are very savvy multimillionaires. But every single, that relationship, those interactions are being measured and evaluated. Now, their cycle time in the past was they would be within 30 days of an interaction that wasn't on point. They would have taken corrective action with their staff. That was their performance level about 8 years ago. Right now, they're kind of almost getting down to real time, right? So that's some of the examples there. Anyway, you get that idea. We talked about trust. I could go on to. Anyways, let's go through the use cases. I gave you one from FCC. So there are use cases in all kinds of domains that we've heard about. We've heard about healthcare. We've heard about training. We've heard about, this is meant to be, I couldn't find a good image. This one here is supposed to be compliance and audit, but if any of you are in the financial background, the ability to audit transactions based on text. So the classic example is being able to go through tens of millions of transactions on expense claims and find out that about 3 million are offline. Right now, the wonderful industry trade magazines or the training that goes in to the, so what's derived from is like from the CPA. If anybody's an accountant in the CPA, they had this incredible case. But the thing about the case was it assumed that as an accountant, you'd be into learning R, right? No, most are not going to do that. But if you were, but could you then take something which is essentially a simplified macro so that you could basically get the same results and be able to audit and go through all the text analytics? Anyway, there are lots of public sector text analyst use cases. So we've talked about the voice of the customer, the voice of the employee. That's another area that we're working with, particularly getting feedback from employees as to what the employees are thinking and being able to sort of do it on the basis of maybe one question and then be able to sort of probe the meaning, the sentiment, the themes out of that one question, and then be able to react on a response to sort of say, well, we put in, of course, We made an adjustment last week. What do you guys think? What do you think? And having enough confidence that you were able to sort of narrow in and give management a validation about how many people were actually concerned about a particular issue. So if you think about that, that's a good one. We saw an amazing, if you were here yesterday for Ryan's presentation from the energy regulator. I mean, you can saw, I got up and I went, oh my God, you blew me away. I mean, that ability to actually take public records that were in the file format and be able to then understand the context, make that public, go through and use machine learning to basically cut out and understand this might be information that might be sensitive or culturally sensitive or knowledge to which we may or may not have permission to display. And then feeding that back as the sort of historical knowledge and feeding it back so that you wouldn't have, what do you call those, death lodges, right? I mean, amazing. We've heard references to resource management. There was a great presentation today using open data in the context of climate change and in the Yukon. Public health, we've heard references to all of the sharing of information, the use of text analytics to go through all the journals that were being published, right? So you think about the hundreds, the thousands of journals and articles and data and analysis of what was going on. So they were able to share that data and use AI to be able to make sense of common themes and issues. We've seen and are starting to see things like we saw an amazing presentation, not at this conference, but another conference on the use of AI to augment the decision-making processes for citizenship and immigration with regards to certain visa scenarios, right? So they were using that to be expediting that process. And then there's models of training. There are certain things where NASA and in particular was using text analytics of the behavior and practices of either scientists, engineers, or even astronauts. And they were using this data that they had to be able to create models to automate and roboticize, as it were, certain practices, including being an astronaut. So there, the basic point I'm trying to make here is that these practices are emerging, but they have implications for the open text, right? So we saw a couple examples. We saw the birdie example yesterday. And what we see typically being used is, shout out to Ryan at the back there, is the fact that these are public data, and particularly in the area of public disclosure, public registries, decisions that have been made, and areas of compliance. One that when I was doing the research that sort of resonated for me a little bit was the beneficial ownership notion, which is a huge area, right? And I know that the government is committed to supporting the beneficial ownership campaign and efforts. And then the last thing I'll say is, even though it exists, this is still a tiny fragment of all of the open data sets. So this is when you search for text on the US one, for example, there's 8,000 references to text. But if you go, like I did a sample, but I would say it's certainly less than 1% are real text analytic examples, right? So there's it's a tiny, tiny subset. But the point I'm trying to make is, if we give tools to the 20, by the way, I checked out before I came down here, on LinkedIn, there are 20,000 LinkedIn public servants at a senior government level, or either senior officials or either managers who have analytics as part of their job title, or they're analysts, right? So there's a big audience out there of analysts. The public servants are supposed to have the time and the energy to aggregate information, to organize information, to analyze information, to apply some sort of rules or adjudication, and then to, as we saw that last presentation, turn around and explain and communicate it. And again, stealing from, I love the quote from Professor Clark there when she said, we can't do it. One of the reasons we can't do it is we don't have time and we don't have the tools. So this is kind of where our business, our little business is in here, is because we're in the tool business, right? And the point is that we created a simple tool, which is generate real-time intelligence from business models that you trust and from that you're going to use, common business models that you do to analyze for your own particular context, but particularly text analytics, and we can do that in minutes, right? So we've worked with lots of different players now, Workers' Compensation Board, University of Texas, Service New Brunswick, Service BC, the Region of Peel, ESDC, and so on and so forth. But primarily we've worked with the Institute for Citizen-Centered Service, I'll get to in a second. How it works, you'll see a demo in a minute, but basically you're uploading the data, and what that data does is it does the data cleansing for you. Okay, and then it does the automated analysis and then some sort of basic reporting. But the goal we're trying to do here is make the interface and the ability to take and use data that you already have and go to the analysis right away. So what we're trying to do is cut out the coding, cut out the fact that so many people, so many analysts, so many organizations are never going to be able to use BI. Right? It's not even they never can use it, they're never going to get it, right? A lot of these engineered products, a lot of these promises from the big, working, heavy enterprise systems never trickle down. And by the time you wait for the initiative, you wait for it all to come to you, your pile of problems you wish you could have gotten on gets higher and higher and higher. The other thing is, and probably the most fundamental thing, is that there's one number that I keep coming across. It's 5 hours of preparation before you can start doing any analysis. And who's got 5 hours? Think about how many emails come in 5 hours. How many phone calls, who gets a phone call anymore? How many texts come in, right? You get the point, right? The people just don't, they need to have something that they can use right away. So we've been most successful working with the Institute for Citizen-Centered Service, and particularly in the service delivery space. And we are they are white labeled our product, and it's called Citizens First Analytics. And the people we're talking to primarily have been organizations who've been collecting data, whose job it is to collect data around what is the citizen experience with government services. And that's where the reference to Mark was. But now I'm going to turn it over to Cody, who's going to tell us a little bit about our fears and a little story about Frankenstein. So Cody, are you there? I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, can you hear me fine?
Yep.
All right. Is it easiest if I take the screen share? Seems like Zoom might make that pretty easy for us if I have the right to. I don't. If not, okay. That would be
you got it now, Cody.
Easiest. Otherwise, Guy will dance together.
You have it now, Cody. Yeah, there you go.
Thank you. All right. That works well. Okay. And if my connection gets bad, my camera's just gonna turn off. So thank you for your patience. So Guy took us to here. So right, this is just a seed. We're gonna come back to this. This is an inspiration to myself, which is context to the journey. Guy talked a bit about the tool that we built in partnership with governments, but behind the scenes, the academic questions, because I'm an academic as much as I am an engineer, is this fascination with human-like machines, these getting machines to do things for us, but this idea that they were incomplete, they were without learning. But the question becomes, what if we could get them to learn? I'm actually going to try to full screen if I can. Not that it matters. That doesn't matter. It's okay. So what if we could get them to learn from our social data? So we're turning the machines on for the first time in terms of social data. So we're getting machines to convert human data into mathematically readable data. So we're going to talk about that theme a lot. And that's amazing because we could do support text analysis. We can match employee aspirations to professional development. We could identify outliers in service experiences by just feeding it social data. One sec. But there's an issue. So if we're feeding it social data, so we're going to talk about text analytics and the great power that it unlocks for us, and we're going to be embracing it. whether we like it or not. And so we're going to be grappling with that in terms of accountability structures and transparency, because by being tools that amplify patterns, we're asking them to magnify biases, where they create self-fulfilling prophecies. The algorithms misinterpret noise and, of course, expose biases. So we're welcoming this new machine to have decisions for us, but we need to be mindful in that process. So this is the academic foundation to our tool, was this ethnographic journey of the evolution of algorithms, text analytics in particular, in an HR algorithm with a large government department. And we learned that we have to be discerning, mindful practitioners to use these tools properly. And we're going to show you text analytics done in a quite empowering way, but one that puts the practitioners in the center. So just to kind of give a little crash course on text analytics, this is the good, the amazing. We can unlock powerful new potential and can democratize the voice because we can find patterns with math. So what we're essentially doing, one of the most common and perhaps tractable definitions of AI, is that we're just getting machines to support aspects of our intelligence, like inferences, look through patterns and suggest possible links for us. So we're getting machines to do great things: classification, regression, transcription, anomaly detection is some work we do a lot of, because we're saying, okay, we know many of us have taken statistics. We might remember regression, linear regression, that if you give it an input, there'll be this set of relationships and then an output. Amazing, we can predict things. Well, we're now saying, well, machines can do that way faster. So instead of me sitting there on SPSS or R, let's get a machine to do 1,000 times a second. So the patterns are now so vast, it's beyond our comprehension as individual traditional statisticians. We used to say, don't data mine, it's a data sin, a cardinal sin in research when I was in stats. And now it's like data mine, data science, go for it. So we've done this transformation of embracing pattern seeking. So patterns are everywhere. From nature, we're learning a lot about space and cosmology. It's incredible. But when we're learning patterns about human experiences, so let's say guy was talking about tracking citizen experience and satisfaction, or employee experiences. Well, how do we get machines to make guesses about those things or find patterns about those things? So this is the little crash course. Many of you know some of this already, but essentially we convert English into math. So natural language processing, you might have heard, is a series of steps to convert language into math. That's it. So tokenization is one of the most common. Don't worry about the definition, it's best seen. We convert, say, a feed of data, like I worked as a data scientist for the government of Abu Dhabi. This was one of our big case projects. It converts it to worked data science government. It breaks it up into simple tokens so that math and patterns can now be structured. Lemmatization is the next step, where, again, don't worry about the definition. This is recorded, so you can pause later if you want to go back, but best seen as an example. Lemmatization is breaking that up further into worked, working, works, data, scientists, etc. So we're breaking it up into a pattern so that math can look for relationships across rows and columns. So we don't think of language that way at all, right? So we can't go analyze 1 billion books for patterns, but we're asking natural language processing tools to say, for instance, it would take 3 sentences, and how it would interpret it is a series of numbers that represent how many times a word appears. So again, that's just so math can happen. Go find patterns for us. So that's incredible because we can now do word associations. So if I type one word, it suggests something that I might have meant, or sentiment. So training on negative or positive. These are the tokenization and lemmatization tools. You don't need to train yourself. There are publicly available models on Python that many of your team members probably even know which ones, and that's great. The idea is not everyone can engineer, right? So we were saying, can we bring some of these powerful tools in? But here's the question mark before we get into the text tools. We're now embracing tools to not only influence our decision making, but we now need to decide how much do we let them fully automate the decisions like a speeding camera that'll take a picture and send you a ticket without a human involved, versus the ones where it's a suggestive or a recommended algorithm. And there's a human that makes decisions along the way of using that tool. And you could build accountability around an individual person or team using tools. So as we build trust in tools, though, here's an interesting pattern that's emerged. This was from my dissertation. Imagine an actor is like an engineer building a tool for a network of users, gets very excited that the tool works. So imagine the tool's this object here and the network uses it, everyone's loving it. Imagine it works so well thanks to new AI, like when you're sitting and using a lot of your digital services, the designer starts to disappear away from the scene. So I'm interested in that. Well, when should we disappear from the scene, and should we? Because again, bias emerges. I don't need to get into the many important examples because I'd rather get into some practical tools in a second. But when we embrace language, we need to be at
Cody,
the center.
Cody. Yeah, I've just been given a little bit of a signal here that because we started late, we're going to have to cut it off a little bit. So maybe I'll just give you like a minute to sum up, and then we'll sum up here. But we've been sort of.
Oh, that's such a shame. Sorry about that, everyone.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but we'll carry on.
Okay. Well, then let me just dive into a quick look at the tool. You don't get the punchline. Oh, that's a drag, but that's okay. So imagine you're sitting on a tool and you've uploaded a simple data set. I'm going to upload customer feedback from a public sector survey, and imagine it's just an Excel sheet, right? We're not talking you have to do a big SQL query or something. So imagine it was an Excel sheet that had some 5-point scale questions, but importantly, a text. And this is what we talked about. There's so much text feedback available that we want to make access to some of those powerful tools that can find patterns for us. So we're going to go to text. We're going to ignore all the other pretty incredible stuff. What's first happening is those packages we mentioned that are publicly available, this tool is crunching up language into those chunks for you so that we can now run some fun and useful text analysis without you having to go manually figure out how to do that on Python. So that'll only take about 10 seconds. I'll show you one quick analysis and then we're done. Oh, perfect. So the first thing I like to see is we're showing all of the, imagine this is social media feeds or your Google reviews or your customer complaints or your employee journey or change management feedback. So many amazing cases we've had. It'll show you the negative and positive. You can zoom right in on who and what. You can adjust, of course, if you don't like the sort of pre-trained suggestion. But here's how I want to wrap up. We also are trying to help you unlock an old technique called qualitative analysis that a lot of us have been afraid of for a long time. How do we do thematic analysis? Count how many people are saying something. We used to turn to large focus groups to do that. So we're using tools to quickly show you themes that you can find in your existing data. So right now, right off the bat, it's spitting some examples at you, but you're in control. So I might see right off the bat, you might be talking about a cool website experience. So I'm going to zoom right in on website, press similar. It's going to find patterns for me. It found web. So I can maybe even look for a little bit more. And it's telling me exactly how many people are saying these things. So let's talk. So 10% of people are talking about website. I haven't even looked at the responses yet. Maybe something else. There seems to be a staff experience here, maybe a negative one. So very quickly, I want to zoom in on staff. As a practitioner, I might be interested in it. It's talking about staff, employees. Again, it's going to calculate the total for me. 16% of people are talking about staff. That fast, right? 30 seconds analysis on 60 some people. I'm going to save it and show you. So now I could look, website's quite positive experiences. Staff's quite a bit more negative. So I can zoom right in and see who. If it's incorrect, if the match is wrong, I could always drop it and get a much more accurate analysis at the top. So I'm done there. But so the story is many users are in control of their text analysis. They're finding themes from raw data and they're tracking it in real time. So some of the best use cases have been change management over the course of 1, 2, 3 months. Ask their employees one question. How is this new process going? Find 20% are complaining about one thing. Ask again in a month. Turn back to your community and say, you said this was an issue. Can we follow up with it? right? So now you're really talking to your stakeholders in real time, and we're seeing it happen a lot. Love to talk about it more, but I don't want to keep people waiting. So sorry if that felt a little squished.
No, that's fine. So I'll just wrap up here quickly, and thanks, Cody, and then we'll take it there. So what I wanted to just sort of impart then is the last point. 2 points. One is, generally speaking, we're seeing incredible movements and progress in terms of the ability to tackle some of the questions that AI have, some of the risks about explainability, about the bias and harm, and the accountability. So the proposed legislation, Bill C-27, addresses that for the private sector. And then if you're working in government, the Treasury Board directives sort of force you to sort of lead the way in that type of approach. This is amazing, because now what we're doing is we're starting to actually tackle and plow through some of the challenges to using text analytics. So that's message number 1. Number 2, what does it mean for this community? Well, it means that text is coming. So what it really implies is it's time to kind of get comfortable with adding to your portfolio of skills, some experience about playing with tools. And this is a tool that's made available through the Institute for Citizen-Centered Service. It's also the way that our operation runs is that we're all about you doing a trial, doing a pilot, taking it out for a test drive, either giving us feedback on what you liked, what you didn't like about the tool, or finding a way through the existing procurement arrangements that the government has with the Institute for Citizen-Centered Service if there was an interest in licensing it. But what we're finding is we're going and we're sort of having 2 friends, we're talking to 2 friends. So now that we're working across the country with governments of BC and New Brunswick and hopefully here in the Yukon at some point, we're going to be able to just take the tool out and play with it. But the goal here was to put a tool in the hands of analysts and staff that they could use, and it doesn't require a lot of technical skill to be able to operate. But it leaves you, the analyst, with the most important thing. You are driving it, and you're making your own interpretation. So it's really meant to augment you. It's really at its core to save you those 5 hours that you never would have had the time to even look at that pile of stuff. So that's really the bottom line message. So thank you very much. And thank you, Cody. And I will just also say it's been just a pleasure to be here for 2 days, to just get totally sucked up in and into this space, because the work is just incredible, and you should all be very proud of the contributions you're making. Thank you.